The October wind rattled the windows of the Henderson family estate as I pulled into the circular driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The colonial-style mansion stood before me, its cream-colored walls and perfectly manicured lawn screaming old money and established tradition. Jack's childhood home had always intimidated me, but tonight felt different. Tonight, I knew something was wrong. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've been married to Jack Henderson for 3 years. What should have been the honeymoon phase of our marriage had slowly transformed into a careful dance around his family's expectations and, more specifically, around his sister Vivian's barely concealed hostility toward me. Jack emerged from the passenger seat, adjusting his navy blazer with the practiced ease of someone who'd grown up attending formal family dinners. At 32, he still carried himself with the confidence of the golden boy he'd always been. Quarterback in high school, valedictorian in college, successful attorney now. His dark hair was perfectly styled and his smile was warm as he reached for my hand. "You okay, babe?" he asked, his brown eyes searching my face with genuine concern. "You've been quiet the whole drive." I forced a smile, smoothing down my emerald green dress, one I'd chosen specifically because Vivian had once mentioned it was a cheap color during last year's Christmas dinner. "Just tired from work. The Morrison case has been keeping me up late." Jack squeezed my hand. "I know Mom and Vivian can be intense sometimes, but they're family, and they love you." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I want to know, where in the world are you watching this video from? And mention your city too. I nodded, though we both knew that was only half true. Eleanor Henderson, Jack's mother, had warmed to me gradually over the years. She was a woman of sharp intelligence, hidden behind southern charm, and while she'd never be overly affectionate, she treated me with respect. Vivian, however, was another story entirely. As we approached the front door, I could hear the familiar sounds of family gathering, laughter, clinking glasses, and the low murmur of conversation. Jack's father, Robert, opened the door before we could knock, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "There's my boy!" Robert Henderson was a man who'd built his construction empire from nothing, and despite the family's current wealth, he'd never lost his working-class roots. His calloused hands engulfed Jack in a bear hug before turning to me with equal warmth. "And my beautiful daughter-in-law, Sarah, you look stunning." "Thank you, Robert. You're looking well yourself." I meant it. Despite being in his mid-60s, Jack's father maintained the robust build of someone who'd spent years on construction sites. His genuine affection for me had been one of the few constants in my relationship with the Henderson family. The foyer was elegantly decorated with fall arrangements, golden chrysanthemums and deep red maple leaves artfully arranged in crystal vases. Eleanor's touch was evident in every detail, from the perfectly polished hardwood floors to the family portraits lining. The walls, the scent of roasted herbs and wine filled the air, promising an elaborate meal. "Everyone's in the living room," Robert said, leading us through the familiar hallway. "Vivian arrived about an hour ago with some news she's excited to share." I felt Jack tense slightly beside me. Vivian's news was rarely good for anyone but herself. The living room was a study in understated elegance. Cream-colored sofas arranged around a marble fireplace, with soft lighting casting warm shadows. Across the Persian rugs, Eleanor rose from her position near the fireplace, resplendent in a tailored burgundy dress that complemented her silver hair. At 58, she was still a striking woman, carrying herself with the poise of someone born into privilege. "Jack, darling." Eleanor's embrace with her son lasted several seconds longer than her polite hug with me. "Sarah, lovely to see you." "Thank you for having us, Eleanor. The house looks beautiful as always." Vivian stood near the window, a glass of white wine in her manicured hand, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves that framed her angular face. At 29, she possessed the kind of sharp beauty that could cut glass. all cheekbones and calculated smiles. She wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and her blue eyes held that familiar glint of superiority that made my skin crawl. "Jack! Sarah!" Vivian's voice was honey-sweet, but I'd learned to hear the poison underneath. She approached us with arms outstretched, her movements graceful and predatory. "I'm so glad you could make it. I have the most wonderful news to share." Jack accepted his sister's hug with practiced ease, but I noticed the slight stiffness in his shoulders. "What's going on, Viv?" Vivian's smile widened, and I felt my stomach clench with apprehension. "I'll tell everyone over dinner. It's going to be such a special evening." Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. Triumph, anticipation, and something that looked suspiciously like revenge. Eleanor clapped her hands together once. "Well then, shall we move to the dining room? Maria has outdone herself tonight." The dining room was Eleanor's pride and joy. A long mahogany table that could seat 12, set tonight for the 5 of us with her finest china and crystal. Candles flickered in silver holders, casting dancing shadows across the deep blue walls, lined with oil paintings of Henderson ancestors. The spread was impressive. Herb-crusted lamb, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and several bottles of wine strategically placed along the table. We took our usual seats, Robert at the head of the table, Eleanor to his right, Jack beside her, then me. Vivian sat across from Jack, directly in my line of sight. As we settled in, I noticed Vivian's particular attention to the wine service, personally ensuring that each glass was filled from specific bottles. "Sarah, you simply must try this Chardonnay," Vivian said, her voice bright as she personally poured wine into my glass. "It's from a small vineyard in Napa that David introduced me to." David Morrison was Vivian's on-and-off boyfriend of 2 years, a trust fund baby who spent most of his time traveling and investing his inheritance in various ventures. Their relationship was complicated, to say the least, and I suspected that whatever news Vivian planned to share tonight involved him. "Thank you," I said, accepting the glass. The wine was a beautiful golden color, and it smelled expensive. But as Vivian poured her own glass from a different bottle, I felt a prickle of suspicion. Why would she serve me from one bottle and herself from another? Robert raised his glass, his voice booming with paternal pride. "To family, to having everyone together again." We all raised our glasses, but I hesitated for just a moment, watching Vivian over the rim of mine. Her blue eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. There was something predatory in her gaze, like a cat watching a mouse it was about to toy with. Jack squeezed my free hand under the table, and I forced myself to take a small sip. The wine was excellent, crisp and clean with hints of apple and citrus, but something felt off. Maybe it was Vivian's behavior, or maybe it was the way she kept watching me, but every instinct I'd developed over 3 years of navigating Henderson family dynamics was screaming danger. As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed easily. Robert regaled us with stories from his latest construction project, Eleanor discussed her charity work, and Jack shared updates about his law practice. I participated when addressed, but I found myself increasingly focused on Vivian's behavior. She was unusually animated tonight, laughing too loudly at her father's jokes and complimenting everyone with an enthusiasm that felt forced. But it was her constant attention to my wine glass that truly set my nerves on edge. Every time I took a sip, she watched. Every time my glass emptied slightly, she was quick to refill it from that same bottle. "So, Vivian," Eleanor said as Maria cleared the dinner plates, "you mentioned having news to share?" Vivian's face lit up with genuine excitement for the first time that evening. "Oh, Mother, it's wonderful news! David proposed." The table erupted in congratulations. Eleanor gasped with delight. Robert raised his glass again, and Jack leaned across the table to hug his sister. I smiled and added my own congratulations, but something about the timing felt orchestrated. "When did this happen?" Jack asked, his lawyer's mind immediately seeking details. "Last night," Vivian said, extending her left hand to show off a sizable diamond ring that caught the candlelight. "He took me to that little French restaurant downtown. You know, the one Sarah recommended?" My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I had never recommended any French restaurant to Vivian. In fact, we rarely spoke about anything more substantial than the weather. But before I could correct her, she continued. "He said he couldn't wait any longer, that he wanted to start our life together immediately." Vivian's voice took on a dreamy quality, but her eyes remained sharp and focused on me. "We're thinking of a spring wedding, something elegant but intimate." Eleanor was already launching into wedding planning mode, discussing venues and guest lists with the enthusiasm of a general planning a military campaign. Robert was asking practical questions about David's career prospects, and Jack was offering to help with any legal aspects of the engagement. I tried to focus on the conversation, but something was wrong with me. The room felt warm, too warm, and my head was beginning to feel light. I'd only had 2 glasses of wine, not nearly enough to affect me this way. My pulse was quickening, and I felt a strange tingling in my fingers. "Sarah, are you all right?" Eleanor's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You look a bit pale." I looked up to find 4 pairs of eyes focused on me with varying degrees of concern, except for Vivian's. Her blue eyes held that same predatory gleam, but now there was satisfaction mixed in with the anticipation. "I'm fine," I managed, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "Just a bit warm." Jack's hand found mine under the table, and I was grateful for the anchor of his touch. But even that felt distant, like I was experiencing everything through a thick fog. "Perhaps some water?" Eleanor suggested, already reaching for the pitcher. "No, the wine is perfect," Vivian interjected quickly. "Sarah, you should finish your glass. This vintage is really special." Something in her tone, too eager, too insistent, finally crystallized my suspicion into certainty. The different bottles, the constant attention to my glass, the careful timing of her announcement. Vivian had done something to my wine. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm. Whatever she'd given me was already in my system, and panicking would only make things worse. I needed to think clearly, to figure out what her endgame was. "You're right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This wine is exceptional." I raised my glass, as if to take another sip, but at the last second I caught Vivian's eye and smiled. "Actually, I'm curious about what you're drinking. It looks different." Before she could protest, I reached across the table and switched our glasses with a quick, fluid motion that I hoped looked casual rather than deliberate. "Sarah, what are you—" Vivian started, her composure cracking for the first time. "I just want to compare," I said innocently, raising her glass to my lips. "You have such excellent taste in wine." Vivian's face went white, then red, then white again. She reached for my original glass, now in front of her, with shaking hands. "Actually, I think I prefer my original choice," she said, her voice tight with poorly concealed panic. "Oh, but you insisted I try yours," I replied, taking a deliberate sip from her glass. The wine tasted the same, which confirmed what I'd suspected, only my glass had been tampered with. What happened next unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Vivian, clearly desperate to prevent me from drinking from her glass, while simultaneously not wanting to consume whatever she'd put in mine, made a critical error. In her panic, she raised my original glass to her lips and took a large gulp. The effect was almost immediate. Her face flushed, her pupils dilated, and she began to sway in her chair. "Vivian?" Eleanor's voice was sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" Jack was on his feet in an instant, moving around the table toward his sister. Robert set down his wine glass with a sharp click against the china. I don't feel well," Vivian mumbled, her words slurring slightly. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor and sending wine and crystal fragments across the room. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Oh my God, Vivian! What's happening?" It was Robert who put the pieces together first. His construction background had made him familiar with workplace accidents and their causes, and his sharp eyes moved from the broken glass to the remaining wine, to his daughter's rapidly deteriorating condition. "What did you put in that wine?" His voice was deadly quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Vivian tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. Jack caught her before she could fall, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Jack's voice was strained as he supported his sister's weight. Robert's gaze was fixed on Vivian, who was now mumbling incoherently, her eyes unfocused and her body limp in Jack's arms. "Vivian," Robert's voice cut through her drug-induced haze like a blade. "What did you put in Sarah's wine?" The words hung in the air like an accusation and a revelation all at once. Eleanor's gasp was audible in the sudden silence, and Jack's face went ashen as understanding dawned. "That's impossible," Eleanor whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. The evidence was literally collapsing in her son's arms. I sat very still, my heart pounding but my mind crystal clear. Whatever Vivian had intended for me, humiliation, incapacitation, or worse, was now happening to her instead. And as I watched the Henderson family grapple with the reality of what their golden daughter had attempted, I realized that this dinner had just become about much more than family announcements. This was about truth, consequences, and the moment when carefully maintained facades finally crumble. The silence in the dining room was deafening, broken only by Vivian's labored breathing and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Jack held his sister against his chest, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as the implications of our father's words sank in. "Someone call 911, Jack said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Something's wrong with her." "No." Robert's single word stopped everyone in their tracks. His weathered face was harder than I'd ever seen it, carved from stone and bitter disappointment. "Not until we understand what she did." Eleanor had sunk back into her chair, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the pallor that had overtaken her features. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, missing it twice before successfully bringing it to her lips. "Robert, please." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Our daughter needs medical attention." "Our daughter," Robert repeated, his tone loaded with implications, "just tried to drug her sister-in-law at our family dinner table." Jack looked between his parents, still supporting Vivian's increasing dead weight. "Dad, that's impossible. Vivian wouldn't do something like that." I watched this family reckoning unfold with a mixture of vindication and genuine sadness. Despite Vivian's treatment of me over the years, seeing her like this brought me no joy. But the truth needed to come out. "Jack," I said quietly, "your father is right." All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of 3 years of swallowed insults and subtle cruelty pressing against my chest. "I've been watching her all evening. She poured my wine from a different bottle than everyone else's. She kept refilling my glass, watching me drink. And when I switched our glasses, I gestured toward Vivian's current condition. Jack's face crumpled with the realization. "But why? Why would she do this?" Before anyone could answer, Vivian stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. Whatever she'd taken was strong, but she was fighting through it with the determination of someone who knew she was caught. "Vivian." Robert's voice was gentle now, but firm. "Look at me, sweetheart." She struggled to focus on her father's face, her pupils still dilated and her movements sluggish. "What did you put in Sarah's wine?" Vivian's voice was thick and slurred. "I just wanted her to what?" Eleanor's voice cracked with anguish. "To what, Vivian?" The family hung on her words, but Vivian's head lolled back against Jack's shoulder. Whatever confession might have come was lost as the drug pulled her back under. "We need to search her purse," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "If she brought something with her, it might still be there." Eleanor looked horrified at the suggestion. "Sarah, we can't just—" "Mom," Jack's voice was quietly devastating. "She drugged my wife at our family dinner, in our home." Each sentence landed like a physical blow. Yes, we can. Vivian's designer handbag sat on the sideboard where she'd placed it upon arrival. Eleanor retrieved it with hands that shook slightly, her maternal instincts warring with the growing evidence of her daughter's guilt. The bag's contents were spread across the mahogany table like evidence at a crime scene. Wallet, phone, makeup compact, breath mints, car keys, and a small amber prescription bottle with no label. Robert picked up the bottle with the careful movements of someone handling evidence. This isn't prescribed to her. Jack gently lowered Vivian into her chair, where she slumped forward like a marionette with cut strings. His face was pale as he took the bottle from his father. Rohypnol, he read from the small print on the bottom, also known as roofies, I finished quietly. The date rape drug. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob, while Robert's face darkened with a rage I'd never seen before. Jesus Christ, Vivian! Jack's voice was barely audible. What were you planning to do? I felt sick, not from any drug, but from the realization of what could have happened. If I hadn't noticed, if I hadn't switched the glasses, if I had consumed what Vivian intended. I need some air, I said, standing on unsteady legs. Jack was beside me instantly, his hand on my elbow. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of... I know, and I did know. Jack was many things, but he wasn't complicit in his sister's schemes. I just need a moment. The back patio was Eleanor's sanctuary, a covered space overlooking carefully tended gardens that stretched toward a small pond. The October air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to process what had just happened. Through the French doors, I could see the Henderson family in crisis. Robert was on his phone, presumably calling their family doctor. Eleanor sat beside Vivian, stroking her daughter's hair while tears streamed down her face. Jack stood apart from them, the prescription bottle still in his hand, staring at it like it held answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. The irony wasn't lost on me. Vivian had announced her engagement tonight, presumably as the perfect capstone to whatever humiliation she'd planned for me. Instead, she destroyed herself and shattered her family's faith in her. But why? That was the question that gnawed at me. Why go to such extremes? Jack joined me on the patio a few minutes later, his shoulders carrying the weight of family loyalty and moral clarity in conflict. Dr. Matthews is on his way, he said, settling into the chair beside mine. He'll make sure she's okay, and he'll help us figure out next steps. And then what? Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkened garden. I don't know. I honestly don't know. She's your sister. She tried to drug my wife. His voice was flat, emotionless. With Rohypnol, Sarah. Do you understand what that means? I did understand. Rohypnol wasn't just about incapacitation. It was about memory loss. Whatever Vivian had planned for me, she'd wanted to ensure I couldn't remember it clearly afterward. What could she have possibly gained from this, I asked, more to myself than to Jack. Jack turned to look at me, his brown eyes filled with a pain I'd never seen before. I think she was trying to break us up. How? Think about it. You're drugged at a family dinner. You act erratically, maybe say things you don't mean, maybe do things you wouldn't normally do, and in the morning, you don't remember any of it clearly. Jack's voice was getting steadier as he worked through the implications, but everyone else does. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Vivian creates a situation where I'm impaired and likely to behave inappropriately or embarrassingly. The family witnesses it. Maybe she even records it, and then, when I can't remember what happened, it becomes my word against theirs. She could have destroyed your marriage, your career, your reputation, Jack continued. And you would have had no way to defend yourself because you wouldn't remember what actually happened. But why? The question escaped as barely more than a whisper. Why does she hate me so much? Jack reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. Because you're everything she's not. Before I could ask what he meant, the patio door opened and Dr. Matthews emerged. William Matthews had been the Henderson family physician for over 2 decades, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd seen them through childhood illnesses, broken bones, and now this. "How is she?" Jack asked, standing as the doctor approached. "Physically, she'll be fine. Rohypnol is dangerous, but she didn't take enough to cause permanent harm. She'll be groggy and disoriented for several more hours, but she should recover completely." "And mentally?" I asked. Dr. Matthews studied me with the careful gaze of someone who'd learned to read between the lines of family dynamics. "That's not really my area of expertise, but I will say this. What happened tonight wasn't impulsive. Rohypnol isn't something you just have lying around. Someone planned this." The weight of his words settled over us like a shroud. This hadn't been a moment of anger or jealousy spiraling out of control. Vivian had deliberately obtained a controlled substance, brought it to a family dinner, and attempted to drug me. "There's something else," Dr. Matthews continued. "I've given your parents my medical opinion, but I feel obligated to tell you, this needs to be reported to the police." Jack's hand tightened on mine. "Dr. Matthews, she's family, and Mrs. Henderson is also family," the doctor replied gently but firmly. "What happened tonight was a serious crime. If the glasses hadn't been switched, if Sarah had consumed what was intended for her, we could be looking at a very different situation right now." Inside, we could hear Eleanor's voice, high and strained, talking rapidly on the phone. Probably calling David, I realized, trying to figure out how to spin this in a way that wouldn't destroy Vivian's engagement along with everything else. "What about the engagement?" I asked. "Does David know what kind of person he's marrying?" Jack and Dr. Matthews exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. "Actually," Jack said slowly, "I think David might know more than we realized." Before I could ask what he meant, Robert appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Dr. Matthews, thank you for coming. Vivian's resting in the guest room." He turned to us. "We need to talk, all of us." Back in the living room, Eleanor sat rigidly in her chair, her composure held together by sheer force of will. Vivian was presumably upstairs, sleeping off the effects of her own intended weapon. "I've been thinking about what happened tonight," Robert began, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to making difficult decisions. "And I keep coming back to one question. Why now?" "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked. "Vivian's been hostile to Sarah for years, but it's been passive-aggressive stuff. Snide comments, social slights, that kind of thing. Why escalate to something like this? And why tonight, when she's announcing her engagement?" Jack leaned forward, his lawyer's mind engaging with the puzzle. "You think the engagement and this are connected?" "I think," Robert said carefully, "we need to look at the timeline. When did David propose?" "Last night, according to Vivian," I said. "And when did she invite us to this dinner?" Eleanor's face went very still. "She called this morning. Said she had wonderful news to share, and could we possibly do a family dinner tonight instead of Sunday?" The implications hung heavy in the air. The timing was too convenient, too orchestrated. "She planned this," Jack said, his voice hollow with realization. "The engagement announcement was just cover for what she really wanted to do." "But that still doesn't answer why," I said. "What could she possibly gain from drugging me that would be worth the risk?" Robert and Eleanor exchanged a look, one of those married couple communications that happens without words. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "There's something we need to tell you. Something about Vivian and David's relationship." Jack straightened. "What about it?" Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "David didn't just propose to Vivian. He's been asking questions about our family, about our finances, about Jack's inheritance." "What kind of questions?" Jack's voice was dangerously quiet. "Specific questions," Robert answered. "About property values, investment portfolios, trust fund details, the kind of questions that make a man wonder what someone's real motivations are." I felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to click into place. "You think David's marrying Vivian for money?" "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that David is more interested in the Henderson family fortune than he is in Vivian. And I think Vivian knows it. The room fell silent as we all processed this information. If Vivian suspected David was using her, if she felt her position in the family was threatened by my presence, if she thought removing me would somehow secure her place. She was trying to frame me, I said, the realization hitting like a physical blow. If I'd been drugged tonight, if I'd acted inappropriately or said something damaging, it wouldn't just have hurt my marriage to Jack. It would have gotten me cut out of the family entirely, and Vivian would remain the golden child, Jack added grimly, the one with the stable engagement and the reliable future. Dr. Matthews cleared his throat. I hate to interrupt, but there's still the matter of what to do about tonight. Regardless of motivations, a crime was committed. Robert stood, his decision made. We call the police. Robert, no. Eleanor's voice was sharp with panic. Think about what this will do to the family, to Vivian's future. I am thinking about it, Robert replied. I'm thinking about what kind of person our daughter has become and what kind of message we send if we cover this up. Jack stood as well, moving to his father's side. Dad's right, Mom. What Vivian did tonight, it can't just be swept under the rug. Eleanor turned to me, her eyes pleading. Sarah, surely you understand. She's family. She made a mistake, but she didn't make a mistake, I interrupted, my voice stronger than I felt. She committed a felony against me at your family dinner table. The words hung in the air, and I saw Eleanor flinch at each one, but they were true, and they needed to be said. If we don't report this, I continued, what happens the next time Vivian feels threatened? What happens when she decides someone else is in her way? Robert nodded grimly. Sarah's right. This ends tonight. As Robert reached for his phone to call the police, I caught sight of movement at the top of the stairs. Vivian stood there, still pale and unsteady, but clearly conscious and listening. Our eyes met across the distance, and I saw something I'd never seen in her face before. Fear. Not the calculated superiority or barely contained hostility I was used to. Real, genuine fear of consequences she couldn't control or manipulate her way out of. The perfect family facade was crumbling, and there was no putting it back together. The 2 hours that followed Robert's phone call felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The Henderson family home, usually a bastion of controlled elegance, was suddenly crawling with police officers, their heavy boots and official notebooks transforming the familiar space into something foreign and threatening. Detective Maria Santos was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. She'd arrived within 30 minutes of Robert's call, bringing with her a crime scene photographer and an evidence technician who carefully bagged the prescription bottle and wine glasses like pieces of a puzzle that would eventually spell out the truth. I sat in Eleanor's pristine living room, still wearing my emerald dress, but feeling like I was in costume for a play I'd never auditioned for. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd chosen this dress to spite Vivian, and now it would probably appear in police reports as evidence of what the victim was wearing. Mrs. Henderson, Detective Santos said, settling into the chair across from me with a notepad balanced on her knee. Can you walk me through the evening's events again? Start with when you first noticed something unusual. I'd already told the story twice, but I understood the process. Details mattered, and consistency was crucial when building a case. It started with the wine service, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Vivian personally poured my glass from a different bottle than she used for herself. That struck me as odd, because she usually doesn't pay me that much attention. Detective Santos made notes as I spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timing, body language, and specific words used. The clinical nature of the interview was oddly comforting. It reduced the emotional chaos of the evening to facts that could be analyzed and processed. Through the dining room doorway, I could see Jack talking to another officer, his hands moving animatedly as he described his sister's behavior. Even from a distance, I could see the strain on his face, the conflict between family loyalty and moral obligation written in every line of his posture. Tell me about your relationship with Ms. Vivian Henderson, Detective Santos continued. Has there been previous animosity between you? This was the complicated part. the gray area where personality conflicts blurred into something potentially more sinister. Vivian has never been welcoming toward me, I said carefully. From the beginning of my relationship with Jack, she's made it clear that she doesn't think I'm good enough for the family. Can you give me specific examples? I thought about the 3 years of carefully delivered insults disguised as concern, social slights that could always be explained away as misunderstandings, and the constant undermining of my relationship with her brother. She once told Jack's friends at a party that I was surprisingly articulate for someone from my background. She's repeatedly mentioned my student loan debt in front of family friends, usually in the context of wondering how someone could marry into a family when they bring financial baggage. Last Christmas, she gave me a self-help book about knowing your place and said it reminded her of me. Detective Santos looked up from her notes. Did you ever report these incidents to anyone? To Jack? Yes. But they were always ambiguous enough that they could be explained away. Vivian's very careful with her words. Until tonight. Until tonight, I agreed. Upstairs, I could hear movement as officers interviewed Vivian. Dr. Matthews had cleared her for questioning, though he'd insisted on being present to monitor her condition. The Rohypnol was still affecting her cognitive functions, but she was coherent enough to understand what was happening. Eleanor appeared in the living room doorway, her perfect composure finally showing cracks. Her silver hair had lost its careful styling, and her makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion and grief etched in her features. Detective Santos? Eleanor's voice carried the authority of a woman accustomed to being heard, but there was an underlying fragility that hadn't been there before. Might I have a word? Detective Santos looked at me, then back at Eleanor. I'm in the middle of an interview, Mrs. Henderson. Please, it's about my daughter. The detective closed her notepad and stood. We'll continue this in a few minutes, Mrs. Mitchell. They moved into the hallway, speaking in voices too low for me to hear clearly, but their body language told the story. Eleanor was pleading, her hands gesturing expressively as she made what was probably a case for family privacy and second chances. Detective Santos listened with professional patience, but her posture remained firm and unmoved. Jack appeared beside me, sinking into the chair that Detective Santos had vacated. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, tie loosened, hair mussed from running his hands through it, and dark circles forming under his eyes. "How are you holding up?" he asked, reaching for my hand. "I'm okay," I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. "How's Vivian?" Jack's face darkened. Scared, angry, alternating between claiming she doesn't remember anything and insisting that this is all a misunderstanding. He paused, his lawyer's training warring with his brotherly instincts. "Sarah, she's asking to talk to you." "What?" "She says she wants to explain, to apologize." I stared at him in disbelief. "Jack, she tried to drug me with Rohypnol. There's nothing to explain." "I know. I told her that. But she's desperate, Sarah. I've never seen her like this." Before I could respond, Detective Santos returned with Eleanor trailing behind her. The older woman's face was pale but resigned, as if she'd just been forced to accept a reality she'd been fighting against. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Santos said, settling back into her chair, "your mother-in-law has shared some additional information that I think you should hear." Eleanor remained standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Sarah, I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for not seeing what Vivian was becoming." "Mrs. Henderson, please, let me finish." Eleanor's voice was shaky but determined. "What Detective Santos made me understand is that tonight wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a pattern I chose to ignore." Jack straightened in his chair. "Mum, what are you talking about?" Eleanor looked at her son with eyes full of regret. "The Christmas party 2 years ago when Sarah got food poisoning. It was right after Vivian had been serving drinks." My blood went cold. "Eleanor, the summer barbecue last year when you felt dizzy and had to go home early. Again, right after accepting a drink from Vivian." Jack's face went ashen. "Mom, are you saying..." I'm saying I suspected something, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. That my daughter couldn't possibly be capable of... Eleanor's voice broke, but tonight proved that my worst fears were justified. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Vivian hadn't just crossed a line tonight. She'd been testing boundaries for years, escalating gradually until she felt confident enough to attempt something this brazen. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Eleanor sank into a nearby chair, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. "Because she's my daughter. Because I kept hoping I was wrong. Because admitting what I suspected would mean acknowledging that I'd failed as a mother." Detective Santos made more notes, her expression grim. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to need you to write down everything you remember about those previous incidents. Dates, times, circumstances, who else was present?" "Of course." Footsteps on the stairs drew our attention. Officer Patricia Reyes descended with Vivian beside her, still unsteady but moving under her own power. Vivian's designer dress was wrinkled, her perfect hair disheveled, and her makeup smeared from tears. She looked younger than her 29 years, and for a moment I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. "Ms. Henderson has asked to make a statement," Officer Reyes announced. Vivian's eyes found mine across the room, and I saw a desperation there that was almost painful to witness. "Sarah, please. I need to explain." Detective Santos looked at me. "It's entirely up to you, Mrs. Mitchell. You're under no obligation to hear what she has to say." I studied Vivian's face, searching for any sign of the calculated cruelty I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, I saw fear, regret, and something that might have been genuine remorse. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll listen." Vivian moved unsteadily to the center of the room, with Officer Reyes remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. She looked at each member of her family in turn, before focusing on me. "I know you have no reason to believe me," she began, her voice hoarse and shaky. "But I never intended for things to go this far." "How far did you intend them to go?" Jack asked, his voice cold. Vivian flinched at her brother's tone. I wanted her to embarrass herself, to say something inappropriate, or act in a way that would make everyone see what I saw." "And what exactly did you see?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Someone who didn't belong." Vivian's words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for years. "Someone who was taking Jack away from us, changing him, making him into someone I didn't recognize." "So you drugged her," Detective Santos said flatly. "I didn't think about it like that," Vivian protested. I thought if she had a few drinks and got a little relaxed, maybe she'd say what she really thought about our family. Maybe Jack would see who she really was." "By giving her Rohypnol," Jack said, his voice deadly quiet. Vivian's composure cracked completely. "I got it from David. He said it would just make someone more talkative, more honest. He said it was harmless." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Eleanor gasped audibly, and Robert's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "David gave you roofies?" Jack stood up so quickly his chair nearly toppled backward. "David Morrison gave you a date rape drug and told you it was harmless." "It wasn't supposed to be like that," Vivian said, tears streaming down her face. "He said people use it at parties all the time to help shy people relax. He said it was no different from having a few extra drinks." Detective Santos exchanged a significant look with Officer Reyes. "Ms. Henderson, I need you to tell me exactly when and where this conversation with Mr. Morrison took place." "Last week, we were at his apartment and I was talking about how frustrated I was with Sarah, how she was ruining family dinners, making everything tense." Vivian wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture that made her look like a child confessing to breaking a vase. "David said he had something that could help, that would make her more authentic. And you believed him?" Robert's voice was filled with a disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "I wanted to believe him," Vivian admitted. "I wanted there to be a solution that didn't involve this." I found myself studying this broken version of the woman who'd tormented me for 3 years. Without her armor of superiority and calculated cruelty, Vivian looked smaller, more human. But that didn't change what she'd done. "Vivian," I said, and everyone turned to look at me. "Do you understand what could have happened tonight? What Rohypnol actually does to people?" She shook her head mutely, and I realized with a chill that she genuinely didn't know. David Morrison had given her a weapon and told her it was a harmless prank. "It doesn't just make people talkative," I continued. "It causes memory loss, disorientation. It's used to facilitate sexual assault because victims can't remember what happened to them." Vivian's face went white. No, that's not," David said. "David lied to you," Detective Santos said bluntly, "and now we need to talk about why." Before anyone could respond, Eleanor's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and went even paler. "It's David," she said. "Don't answer it," Detective Santos instructed. "Officer Reyes, I need you to contact dispatch. We need to pick up David Morrison for questioning." "No," Vivian said, panic creeping into her voice. "You don't understand. David loves me. He's going to marry me." "He wouldn't..." "Vivian," Jack said gently, "think about what you just told us. David gave you a dangerous drug and lied about what it would do. Does that sound like someone who loves you?" The truth was written across Vivian's face as the implications sank in. Her perfect engagement, announced just hours ago with such triumph, was built on lies and manipulation. "He used me," she whispered. "Yes," Eleanor said sadly. "I think he did." Detective Santos stood, her notepad filled with details that would soon become part of an official investigation. "Ms. Henderson, I'm placing you under arrest for assault with intent to administer a controlled substance. You have the right to remain silent." As the detective read Vivian her rights, I felt an unexpected wave of sadness wash over me. Not for the woman who'd tried to drug me, but for the scared, insecure person underneath who'd been so easily manipulated by someone she thought loved her. Jack's hand found mine, squeezing gently as we watched his sister being led away in handcuffs. The golden child, the perfect daughter, reduced to a cautionary tale about insecurity and desperation. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, her voice small and lost. "Now," Detective Santos said, "we find David Morrison and figure out how deep this goes." As the police cars pulled away from the Henderson estate, taking Vivian into a reality she'd never imagined for herself, I realized that this night had changed everything. Not just for our family, but for my understanding of the lengths people will go to when they feel their world slipping away. The perfect family facade hadn't just crumbled. It had shattered completely, leaving only the truth in its wake. 3 weeks later, I sat in the waiting area of the Riverside County District Attorney's office, watching Jack pace the length of the small room with the restless energy of a caged animal. His usual composure had been replaced by the kind of raw anxiety that comes from watching your family's carefully constructed world collapse in real time. The past 21 days had been a whirlwind of police interviews, legal consultations, and media attention that the Henderson family was utterly unprepared for. When the story broke, local socialite attempts to drug sister-in-law at family dinner, it had sent shockwaves through their social circle and beyond. Mrs. Mitchell, a young assistant district attorney, emerged from the inner offices carrying a thick file folder. "I'm ADA Jennifer Walsh. Thank you for coming in today." Jennifer Walsh was exactly what I'd expected from someone in her position, sharp, professional, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd built her career on seeking justice for victims. She was probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail. "Please come in, Mr. Henderson, you're welcome to join us." Her office was small but efficiently organized, with law books lining one wall and case files stacked neatly on every available surface. She gestured for us to sit in the chairs across from her desk before opening the folder that would determine Vivian's fate. "First, let me update you on David Morrison," Ada Walsh began, consulting her notes. He was arrested 2 days after your incident, and his apartment search yielded some interesting results. Jack stopped pacing. What kind of results? Mr. Morrison had been researching the Henderson family finances for months. We found printed bank statements, property records, investment portfolios, information that someone would only need if they were planning some kind of financial manipulation. I felt a chill run down my spine. How did he get access to private financial records? Some of it was public record, property deeds, business filings, that sort of thing. But the bank statements and investment information. Ada Walsh paused meaningfully. Those came from Vivian. Jack sank into his chair, as if the weight of betrayal had become too much to bear standing. She was feeding him information about our family's finances. It appears that way, yes. We also found correspondence between Morrison and several other individuals that suggests this wasn't his first attempt at targeting wealthy families through romantic relationships. The implications were staggering. Vivian hadn't just been manipulated by David. She'd been the victim of a calculated con game that had been in progress for months, possibly years. What about the Rohypnol? I asked. Ada Walsh's expression darkened. Morrison claims he told Vivian it was a mild sedative, something that would just make you more relaxed and talkative, but the evidence suggests he knew exactly what he was asking her to do. What evidence? Text messages between Morrison and an associate in Los Angeles discussing the Henderson situation and how to neutralize the sister-in-law problem. The messages make it clear that Morrison saw you as an obstacle to his access to the family fortune. Jack's hands clenched into fists. So he convinced my sister to drug my wife because I was in his way? That's our working theory, yes. Morrison needed Vivian isolated from family support, completely dependent on him emotionally and financially. Your marriage represented stability and grounding that threatened his control over her. I tried to process the magnitude of what David Morrison had orchestrated. He'd identified Vivian as a target, cultivated a relationship with her, gathered intelligence about the family's wealth, and then manipulated her into committing a felony when I proved to be an obstacle to his plans. Where does this leave Vivian legally? Jack asked, his voice strained. Ada Walsh closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. That's actually why I asked you both to come in today. Given the new evidence about Morrison's manipulation and the pattern of predatory behavior we've uncovered, the district attorney is prepared to offer a plea agreement. What kind of plea agreement? Vivian would plead guilty to attempted assault with a controlled substance, a reduced charge from the original felony count. She'd serve 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and mandatory counseling for both substance abuse and psychological manipulation. Jack looked at me, clearly torn between relief that his sister wouldn't face the maximum penalty and grief over what she'd have to endure. What about restitution? I asked. Medical expenses, counseling costs, any other damages you've incurred as a result of the incident. The court can also order a restraining order if you feel that's necessary. I thought about the past 3 weeks, the sleepless nights, the anxiety attacks every time I had to eat or drink anything in public, the constant looking over my shoulder. But I also thought about Vivian sitting in a jail cell, finally understanding how completely she'd been used. I'd like to see her, I said, surprising both Jack and Ada Walsh. Before we agree to anything, I want to talk to Vivian. The Riverside County Jail was exactly as depressing as I'd expected. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and the constant background noise of institutional life. Vivian sat across from me in the visitor's room, separated by reinforced glass and connected only by phones that crackled with static. The transformation in her appearance was shocking. Gone was the perfectly styled hair, the designer clothes, the armor of superiority that had defined her for as long as I'd known her. She wore a standard orange jumpsuit. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face was free of makeup, revealing dark circles and the pallor of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely audible through the phone. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us like a physical barrier. I know you probably won't believe me, Vivian said finally, but I'm glad it was me who drank that wine instead of you. Are you? Yes. Her voice was stronger now, more certain. When I woke up the next morning and realized what I'd actually tried to do to you, what could have happened? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Sarah, I've been such a fool. Tell me about David. Vivian's face crumpled. He made me feel special, like I was the center of his universe. And when you married Jack, when I started feeling like I was losing my place in the family, David was there telling me that my feelings were valid, that you were the problem. How long was he planning this? I think from the beginning. Looking back now, I can see how he maneuvered me into sharing information about the family, about our finances, about you and Jack's relationship. Vivian's voice was hollow with self-recrimination. He played me perfectly. The engagement was fake. The ring was real, but everything else... Vivian shook her head. He never loved me. I was just a means to an end. I studied her face through the glass, searching for any sign of the calculated cruelty that had defined our relationship for 3 years. Instead, I saw genuine remorse, hard-won wisdom, and something that looked like the beginning of self-awareness. Vivian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. The other times, the Christmas party, the summer barbecue, did you drug me then too? Vivian closed her eyes and I saw shame wash over her features. Yes, but it was just small amounts of David's relaxation pills. I thought they were harmless. I thought I was just leveling the playing field. Leveling the playing field how? Making you less perfect, less composed. David said that if people saw you when your guard was down, they'd realize you weren't as wonderful as Jack thought you were. The admission hit me like a physical blow, but it also provided a strange sense of closure. Those incidents hadn't been random bad luck or food poisoning. They'd been deliberate attacks on my well-being, orchestrated by someone who saw me as a threat to her position in the family. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Vivian's voice broke. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am truly, deeply sorry for what I put you through. I believed her. Sitting there in that sterile room, looking at this broken version of the woman who'd tormented me, I could see that her remorse was genuine. What happens now? She asked. The DA is offering a plea deal. 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, counseling. Vivian nodded slowly. I'll take it. I need to take responsibility for what I did. And after that? I don't know. I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to be David's perfect girlfriend, or Daddy's perfect daughter, or Jack's perfect sister. She looked directly at me through the glass. Maybe that's something I need to figure out. 2 weeks later, I stood in Eleanor's garden, watching her tend to the late-season flowers with the careful attention of someone who needed the meditative rhythm of ordinary tasks. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter. The Henderson family was still reeling from the revelations about David Morrison's broader criminal enterprise. The FBI had uncovered evidence that he'd targeted at least 4 other wealthy families over the past 5 years, using romantic relationships to gain access to financial information and manipulate family dynamics for his own gain. "How are you doing?" Eleanor asked, not looking up from the chrysanthemums she was carefully pruning. "Better," I said, and meant it. "The counseling is helping." Eleanor had insisted on paying for my therapy, along with all the other expenses related to what she now referred to as Vivian's betrayal. It was her way of trying to make amends for the years of willful blindness about her daughter's behavior. And Jack? He's struggling with the guilt. Feels like he should have seen what was happening, should have protected me better. Eleanor finally looked up, her blue eyes filled with the kind of pain that comes from questioning everything you thought you knew about your own family. "I failed you both," she said quietly. "I saw the signs, suspected what Vivian was doing, and I chose my daughter's reputation over your safety. You couldn't have known how far she'd go. Couldn't I?" Eleanor's voice was sharp with self-recrimination. "A mother knows when her child is capable of cruelty. I just chose not to see it. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the physical activity providing a welcome distraction from the emotional complexity of our new reality. The Henderson family was learning to function without the fiction that had held them together for so long. The belief that wealth and social position could insulate them from the consequences of poor choices. "Sarah," Eleanor said eventually, "I want you to know that regardless of what happens with Vivian, you are family. You belong here, and no one will ever make you feel otherwise again." It was the acceptance I'd been seeking for 3 years, offered under circumstances I never could have imagined. 6 months later, I received a letter from Vivian. She was 3 months into her sentence, participating in therapy programs and working in the jail library. The letter was 10 pages long, handwritten in careful script and filled with insights that suggested genuine growth rather than manipulation. She wrote about the other women she'd met in jail, women whose stories of manipulation and abuse mirrored her own in disturbing ways. She wrote about the therapy sessions that were helping her understand how her insecurity and need for validation had made her an easy target for someone like David Morrison. And she wrote about her plans for after her release, plans that involved rebuilding her relationship with the family, making genuine amends, and finding a way to use her experience to help other women avoid similar manipulation. The letter concluded with a simple request. "When I get out, would you be willing to have coffee with me, not as family members forced together by circumstance, but as 2 women who survived the same predator and might have something to learn from each other?" I set the letter down on my kitchen table and looked out at the life Jack and I had built together, a life that was stronger now because it had been tested and had survived. The Henderson family would never be the same, but perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Sometimes facades need to crumble before authentic relationships can take their place. I picked up a pen and began to write my reply. "Dear Vivian, yes, I think coffee would be a good place to start." The truth had come at a terrible price, but it had also brought the possibility of genuine healing. And sometimes that's the best outcome you can hope for when perfect facades finally fall away, revealing the flawed but authentic people underneath. Epilogue. 1 year later, I sat across from Vivian in a small coffee shop downtown, watching her carefully measure sugar into her latte with hands that no longer shook. She'd been out of jail for 3 months, living in a supervised halfway house and working part-time at a non-profit organization that helped victims of financial manipulation. The woman across from me bore little resemblance to the perfectly polished socialite who'd tried to drug me at that family dinner. Her hair was shorter, styled simply, and she wore jeans and a sweater that looked like they'd come from a department store rather than a designer boutique. But the most striking change was in her eyes. They held a clarity and self-awareness that had been completely absent before. "How's the family doing?" she asked, stirring her coffee with deliberate movements. "Good. Different, but good." I thought about the Sunday dinners that had replaced the formal family gatherings, the honest conversations that had replaced polite small talk, the genuine affection that had emerged once everyone stopped performing their assigned roles. "Your parents miss you." "I know, but I'm not ready yet. I need to be sure that I'm going back for the right reasons." It was a mature response from someone who was learning to examine her own motivations with brutal honesty. "What about David?" Vivian's face darkened slightly. 15 years federal prison. The other families he targeted. The damage he did. She shook her head. "I'm just grateful that I was caught before he could use me to hurt anyone else." We sat in comfortable silence, 2 women who'd found their way to an unlikely friendship through shared trauma and hard-won wisdom. "Sarah," Vivian said finally, "I want you to know that seeing who you really are, not the threat I imagined you to be, but the person you actually are, has been one of the most important parts of my recovery." "What do you mean?" "You could have destroyed me completely. You had every right to push for the maximum sentence, to turn the family against me, to make sure I lost everything." Vivian's voice was steady, but emotional. Instead, you gave me the space to face what I'd done and find a way to become someone better. It was true. I'd made a conscious choice to respond to Vivian's betrayal with accountability rather than revenge, healing rather than destruction. We're all capable of becoming people we never thought we could be, I said. The trick is choosing which version of ourselves we want to nurture. As I walked home that afternoon, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. The perfect family dinner that had revealed perfectly hidden dysfunction. The attempted crime that had exposed a larger pattern of manipulation. The sister-in-law who'd tried to destroy me and had instead found her own path to redemption. Jack was waiting for me when I got home, his face eager with curiosity about how the coffee meeting had gone. "So," he asked, wrapping his arms around me in the kitchen that had become our sanctuary. "So, I think your sister is going to be okay," I said, leaning into his embrace. "Different, but okay. And us?" I thought about everything we'd survived. The betrayal, the legal proceedings, the family crisis that had tested every foundation of our relationship. "We're better than okay," I said, and meant it completely. Sometimes the most toxic people in our lives are the ones who force us to become stronger, more authentic versions of ourselves. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, they find their way to authenticity too. The Henderson family would never again be the picture of perfect unity they'd once presented to the world, but they'd become something more valuable. A family built on truth, accountability, and the hard work of genuine love. And that, I thought, as Jack held me close in our imperfect but honest life, was worth infinitely more than any facade could ever be.